Good morning. Obviously, we're going to talk about pride and humility today, right? We're still talking from Proverbs. We're going to do that this week. Next week will be Thanksgiving, so we'll be doing that one. Quite a few years ago, my life took a hard left turn, and I wasn't real sure exactly what I was going to do. I was teaching at Amberton University at the time, but I didn't know what God had in store for me. I didn't know what career I might be doing. I didn't know much of anything. I had a school principal at an elementary school that was a friend, and he knew that a lot of my training was human facilitation and intervention. So he said, we're having a TEPSA group meet in East Texas soon. Would you speak there? I said, what is TEPSA? He said, Texas Elementary Principals Scholastic Association or something like that. I said, okay. It was a small gathering, and so I went and I spoke about conflict management. And there happened to be a lady there named Gretchen Ricker. And Gretchen, you remember Gretchen? Gretchen asked me, she was on the board at TEPSA, and she said, why don't you come to Austin and present this? I still didn't know what that meant. I didn't know Austin was a big deal. I didn't know it was a major conference. I didn't know nothing. So I said, well, okay. And so I went to TEPSA, and I had my little breakout session. Certainly wasn't a keynoter at all. But I had a breakout session, and my room only sat about 40 people. My session was full, and then I had another session right after lunch, and that session had about 80, and we had people just sitting around everywhere and on the walls. And then I did another session after that, and they moved me to another room, and there were about 300 there. Well, that was exciting for me, and I thought that was pretty cool. I still didn't know exactly what it meant. I never advertised a day in my life, but I didn't know how things worked in education, and I started getting calls from schools. Would you come here and do our convocation? Would you go speak there? Would you come to this conference? And after a while, it started to kind of get to be a prideful kind of thing. Where I was excited about getting to go to a national convention or go to Seattle or go wherever the case may be. And I wanted to be the keynote guy, and it was more fun if I was a keynote guy. And it kind of gets to your head because people begin to want to meet you, and they want to talk to you, and they want you to sign the stuff that they've got in their hands and stuff like that. And it can really make you pretty arrogant. But after a while, I got kind of tired of airplanes. And I missed Melissa. And I went to the most phenomenal places, but I was by myself. What fun is sightseeing by yourself? Pictures don't do justice. And the pride just started chipping away, where I didn't really care if it was a keynote anymore. And I began to just, wherever I'm speaking, that's good. God has blessed me tremendously. I don't deserve a minute of what I'm getting. And so the smaller rooms were okay because I began to understand that a crowd of 20 is just as important as a crowd of 2,000 if they're going to go touch children. And eventually I got a call from the military that y'all know about, and that's been about the last 10 or so years, 15 maybe, to go and speak to the world's greatest warriors and do family seminars and couples retreats. And they're really, really small. And I was sitting at one of those once, and it was almost as if God said out loud to me, it took me 55 years to get you ready for this. Because it's the most humbling experience of my life. When you watch a soldier that's been all over the world protecting us take a knee to take communion from the chaplain, it takes your breath away. And all the pride is gone. But sometimes some other things got to happen first, don't they, to get us to that point. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18, it says exactly the verse you know. Pride comes before destruction. Arrogance comes before a fall. In Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 18, it says there's 6 things, 7 things God hates. That's a big word, isn't it? There's 7 things God hates. And the very first one is haughty eyes. I never worried about that as a kid because I didn't know what haughty meant, so I figured I didn't have them. Maybe it's cataracts or something old people get. I didn't know. But then I figured out what haughty eyes was. They're eyes that look down on other people in order to convince yourself you're better than them. God hates pride like that. God hates people that look down on other people. Wow, there might be a lesson or two for Christians in there, you think? Oh, Nebuchadnezzar. Y'all remember Nebuchadnezzar? Daniel chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar got full of himself, and he's declaring to everybody, and he's looking out a window and says, look at mighty Babylon that I've built. I've put my palace here, and it's all to my glory and my honor, and it's to recognize my majesty. And God says, oh yeah? Here's what's going to happen. You're going to crawl around like all fours out in the fields like a beast. You're going to eat grass. Your hair's going to grow. You're going to have the dew of the earth on you. You're going to lose your mind. Basically, he tells him, you're going insane. How long? 7 years. Takes some of us longer to learn lessons, right? Any of you ever made a mistake more than once? All right, well, 7 years you're going to do that, and he does. He's completely insane. He's out there wandering around in the fields on all fours, eating grass. His hair's like eagle feathers, it says. His fingernails and toenails grow out like talons. And he learns a little bit about humility the hard way. Proverbs 11 talks about humility. And it says, where with pride follows disgrace. I know that. Do you know that? Have you ever faced that? Have you ever gotten cocky about something and got slapped over it? With pride comes disgrace. But with humility comes wisdom. It also says in Proverbs, this verse, wherever pride is, there's strife. Wherever there's pride, there's fighting. Now think about that, folks. Anytime you see two people getting into it, anytime you see a couple going at each other's throat, what do you got present? You better believe it. Every time a church member walks out the back door and says, I ain't going back there anymore, or I don't like that, or I don't like people doing that, or I don't agree with that, you'll guess what's involved? Pride, because ain't none of us figured it all out. With pride, there comes strife. We also learn in Proverbs 22 that the treasure of humility is life. When you're humble, you got life, man. You feel good about everything. You don't worry so much. Because when you're humble, your heart can now be filled with grace. See, sometimes we got to kick stuff out of our heart in order to get God's grace, right? Amen. Sometimes there's some stuff got to be thrown out of there. Paul knew that. Paul said in 1 Corinthians, Philippians, he said, you want to brag? I can brag. Man, I've been whipped with rocks. I've been whipped with whips. I've been thrown over walls. I've been shipwrecked. I've been bit by snakes. I've given more than any of you. I've suffered more than any of you. I've spoken in tongues more than any of you. Man, I got it. You want to talk about pedigree? I'm a Jew of Jews, man. I was circumcised at the right time. I'm trained correctly. I was trained at the feet of Gamaliel. I'm a Pharisee. And then he says, I consider all of that trash just to know Jesus. You see, Paul had to kick all of his credentials out of his heart so that Jesus could pour grace into his heart. And that sometimes we all need to do some soul searching. What's got to be kicked out before Jesus can pour that grace in there, before you can find that treasure, which is life? We find out in Proverbs 3, it says, God mocks the proud. That's funny to me. God just sitting in heaven. I get all cocky and arrogant, and God's up there going, yeah, really? You think you did that? You think you got this? Almost like Job. Oh, you think you know everything? Well, you tell me, where's the wind come from, and where's hail come from, and how do animals know when they're supposed to have their young? God mocks the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And the encouragement we get is, be like Jesus. Just be like Jesus. That old phrase, what would Jesus do? Be like Jesus. He did not count equality with God something to hold on to. You know I'm talking from Ephesians. He didn't say, man, I'm going to hold on to this. He could have. He didn't count equality with God something to be held on to, but he emptied himself. And he took the form of a servant, even a servant unto death. Jesus completely 100% is our model of humility. But then notice what it says. Paul says, so God exalted him. If you want to be exalted, you got to become humble first. God gives grace to the humble. It's when David really discovered God. When he sins with Bathsheba and he sleeps with another man's wife and he gets her pregnant and then he has her husband killed. And he's enjoying life, just moving along, all arrogant and proud, full of haughty eyes. And the prophet comes to him and condemns him. And David pours his heart out to God. And he becomes humble. And he goes back to the man that knows God's heart. It's the heart of Joseph, who thought he was the best kid in the world, who was daddy's favorite, had his coat of many colors, and he bragged about it, and he showed it off, and he talked about all of his wonderful dreams, and his brother sold him. And he got sold into slavery, and he gets moved around, and he goes and he's becoming a good guy, and then he gets accused of trying to rape a woman. He ends up in prison. His life gets pretty messed up, but then he ends up getting called, and he becomes the number 2 man in Egypt. Well, his brothers show up hungry, right? They show up hungry. Man, he could have blasted those guys. Can you imagine how much anger he had at them? You took me away from my daddy. You said I was dead. You made my daddy grieve all these years. You lied about everything. It would have been so easy to throw him in prison to get back at him. Instead, he said, what you meant for evil, God used for good. That's humility, is learn your lessons. I talked to a young minister lately that got pretty dadgum damaged by some folks. And my response was, son, that ain't going to be the last time. Learn from it. What are you going to learn? What are you going to learn? Let it go. That's what humility does, but what do you learn in order to move forward? It's just humility. The Proverbs say that a heart full of pride precedes a fall, but humility precedes honor. We get it backwards sometimes. So many examples in the world. They got on the Titanic, said it's unsinkable. This is the one ship that's made for eternity. 2,200 miles later, they found out it wasn't. You want to learn humility? Here's a few ways to do it, folks. Start examining your life. Examine your life and think about, God, where is pride in me? What are some ways I'm being prideful? What are some ways that I don't even see it? What are some things I need to change about me? And then pray hard about it. Pray with somebody else about it. You want to learn humility? Go serve somebody. This week I went up to Plano and I was working at Covenant Kids and I did 3 presentations, felt pretty good about them, got a little bit cocky, I think. I drove home and I stopped to get something to eat, a snack, and I never even think about that. I never think about drive-thrus or all those kind of things. And when I stopped at this particular McDonald's, there was a man, it was at the zoo. I call it the Zoo McD. We had a name for every McDonald's when our kids were growing up. This is Zoo McD. There was a man that was leaning up against he had his backside against the retaining wall, and he was laying back on his head on the concrete curb that tells your car how far to go. And he was asleep right up until I locked my truck, and that woke him up. And I looked at him for a while, and I didn't do anything, and it bothered me. So when I came out, I went over to him, and we visited a little while. And I said, hey, you okay? He said, yeah, I'm just sleeping. I said, how long you been homeless? I don't know. Really? No, I've been homeless a long time. I don't know. You got any family? Maybe. I think so. Got some problems? Yeah, I'm supposed to be on medications, and I haven't been a long time. I said, you hungry, sir? Yeah, I'm hungry. I said, you want a hamburger? You like hamburgers? Yeah, I want a hamburger. I said, all right, I'm gonna go around, and you'll see me go through the drive-thru, and I'll be back. I said, what do you want to drink with that? He said, can I have a strawberry milkshake? A lot of people would have said, how can you be so arrogant to be out there homeless and somebody offers you a meal and you tell them what you're going to drink? You need to swallow your pride. I am so grateful that that man could ask for what he wanted. And the reason he asked is because he has no pride. And he's just been humbled. And the fact of the matter is he's emotionally disturbed. The guy's mentally ill. And he's been struggling all these years. And so he got his quarter pounder with cheese and fries and his strawberry shake. And as I drove off, I was in tears. Because I thought, Lord, I take it so for granted that I can just stop and get whatever I want whenever I want And here's a guy using a stone for a pillow. That sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? That guy might just know Jesus better than I ever have, because he's all he's got to lean on. If you want to be humble, seek advice. Go to people. Listen to other people. Because when you do that, when you're humble, relationships get better. We have less conflict. I have more empathy for you. I don't judge what you do. I seek to understand why you do it. And realize your behavior doesn't have nothing to do about me. You don't wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to make Eric mad at church Sunday. That's your stuff. And maybe I could help you with it. When you're humble, you're looking for contentment, not entitlement. Pride looks for entitlement, what I deserve. Humility looks for contentment. When you're humble, you're not stressed all the time. Your anxiety problems go down. When you're humble, you become a lifelong learner. And you're always looking for feedback from people because you always want to be better. You always want to be more like Jesus. Man, one of those conferences I did all those years, I was at a big conference and I was in a breakout session. And there's a fella in the room next to me. His name is Jim Fay. Now, Jim Fay wrote some books called Love and Logic, and they dominated education for a long time. And they're still very, very useful. It's tremendous education on how to deal with children. Jim Fay was presenting next door. Well, we had our break, and then we started another breakout session, and on the front row of my session is Jim Fay. And I went over and asked him, I said, Jim, I don't know if I can talk with you in here. You want to do this session? I can't touch the hem of your garment with what you know about kids. He's been a teacher, a coach, a professor, a school superintendent. He's got PhDs one after another. He was about 80 years old. And he said, I want to learn from you. I had nothing to teach that man. But he was still wanting to learn, and he was still a seeker. That's what humility does for you. It lowers your blood pressure. You taking blood meds? Get a little humble. That'll lower your blood pressure a little bit. Humility allows you to accept reality. When you're arrogant, when you're prideful, you're always battling against reality. You're always wondering what went wrong. How could you have done, what'd you do? Why in life giving you what you deserve? When you're humble, you just say, thank you, God, for today. And you accept reality. When you're humble, you're grateful. We're going to practice Thanksgiving next week. When you're humble, you thank people for what they've done, and you're aware of people in your life, and you're grateful that they're here. When you're prideful, you push people away. When you're prideful, you get arrogant and you get judgmental. When churches get prideful, we get exclusive and elite. When churches get prideful, they refuse to change because they think they already know it all. And they think it's all about them rather than let's be all things to all men so by any means we can save a few. You got to be humble to do that. If you're prideful, you get materialistic as a people. You lose your transparency. See, people coming in off the street, people visiting us need to know, well, they need to see transparency in us. And if I'm full of myself, there is no transparency. They got to see clearly who we really are. That we don't have it all figured out. We don't know all the answers. We're stumbling and messing up all the time. And we do things we ought not do. And we do things we regret. And many of us have been through the storm. And everybody in here has been broken. When you're humble, people can see who you are. And like Mark quoted, when you're humble, you can do exactly what God said through Micah. Here's all I want. This is all I want. Would you please act justly? Just treat people justly. Would you please love mercy? And would you please walk humbly? That's what God wants. That's the folks that He pours His grace on. It's hug and howdy time. Oh, Melissa's sitting up there. She's back. It's family time. She didn't like hug and howdy. It's family time. This is a time when we go and we greet and we meet and we love and we share. If there's folks around you don't know, go greet them. If you want to become a Christian right now, confess Jesus, get in the water. We're going to do it right now. Whatever it is you need right now, I want you to walk around. I want you to bless somebody, love on somebody, and then get quiet because Sherry's going to end us up, all right? Get after it.